I woke up from a coma to the unimaginable. My husband handing me divorce papers instead of a comforting embrace. As I lay there, struggling with the reality of my new life, the one person I thought would stand by me had already moved on. Betrayal cut deeper than the physical pain, but it was my son's confused tears that fueled my resolve to fight back. Before we continue, if you're gripped by stories of courage and unexpected twists, don't just watch. Join our community. Hit the subscribe button, smash that like, and turn on notifications to never miss a video where resilience triumphs over despair. The early years of my marriage with Clark were painted in the most vibrant hues of joy and contentment. Our story began like a fairy tale, adorned with laughter, shared dreams, and spontaneous adventures that seemed to perfectly encapsulate our love for each other. Our wedding day, set under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree, was as enchanting as the promise of our future together. Following our simple yet heartfelt ceremony, where the sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, we embarked on our journey as husband and wife with nothing but love and excitement in our hearts. Those first years were blissful, filled with the thrill of crafting a life together. We decorated our home, a charming mix of old and new, reflecting our unique personalities and the life we envisioned. Amidst these joyous times, the most significant blessing came. A year into our marriage, we welcomed our son, Lucas. His arrival was a dream come true, filling our home with new laughter and an abundance of love. Watching Clark transform into a father was a delight. He embraced his role with the same passion and dedication that he had shown in every aspect of our life together. Our days were filled with small, precious moments, from morning cuddles to joyful bedtime stories, that stitched our little family closer. With Lucas's arrival, our world seemed to expand in the best ways possible. Our conversations grew richer, filled with plans for the future and discussions about the values we wanted to instill in our son. We celebrated each milestone, from Lucas's first steps to his first words, with a sense of wonder and gratitude. As a family, we explored life's simple pleasures, picnics in the park, weekend trips to the seaside, and festive family gatherings. These were the moments that framed our perfect love story, where happiness was not just an occasional visitor, but a permanent resident in our home. Our anniversaries became celebrations, not just of our love, but of how our family was growing together. Each year, we returned to that old oak tree where we had promised to love each other forever, to take a family photo. It became a beautiful tradition, a way to visually document our growth and happiness. These photos were more than just images, they were chapters of our life, each one filled with precious memories. Reflecting on those golden years, it's the joy and the sense of completeness that stand out. The way Lucas's laughter would fill the room, how he'd grasp our hands as we walked together. These are the moments that define the essence of our early years. They remind me of a time when happiness seemed as natural as breathing, and the future was bright with promise. As our son Lucas grew, bringing endless joy with each new milestone, a subtle shift began to emerge in our household. Clark's once attentive nature and eagerness to spend time together gradually began to wane. At first, it was the small things. Coming home late from work more frequently, his phone suddenly becoming a constant companion during family times, and an air of distraction that seemed to follow him around the house. I noticed these changes incrementally. Each excuse of overtime work or a sudden need for weekend meetings was met with understanding on my part, conditioned by years of mutual support and trust. However, the accumulation of these small, seemingly insignificant moments began to weave a tapestry of doubt in my mind. One evening, as we prepared for dinner, the atmosphere felt unusually tense. Clark was particularly quiet, lost in his thoughts, barely engaging with Lucas or me. It was during moments like these that I found myself observing him, trying to decipher the thoughts behind his distant gaze. His laughter, once so easy and frequent, had become a rare sound in our home. My suspicions deepened one night when, After Clark had fallen asleep, his phone, usually kept within arm's reach, buzzed with a message. Driven by a mix of concern and curiosity, I glanced at the screen. The text was from an unsaved number, and it read, "Can't wait to see you again." The ambiguity of the message left me with a cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. The following days were a blur of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to demand an explanation, but another part feared what his answers might reveal. I wrestled with the loyalty and trust we had built over the years against the growing suspicions that now clouded my thoughts. Deciding to look for clearer signs before confronting him, I began paying more attention to his behaviors. His phone became a forbidden territory, always on silent mode and never left unattended. His excuses for staying out late grew more frequent, and our conversations became a series of monosyllabic responses. One day, as I cleaned around the house, I stumbled upon a receipt for a restaurant, a place we had once considered our spot. The date and time on it coincided with one of his alleged late work nights. This discovery felt like a punch to the gut, a tangible piece of evidence that my fears might be grounded in reality. I felt torn between the life we had built and the growing realization that it might be unraveling. Each sign of infidelity, no matter how small, felt like a betrayal not just to me, but to the family we had promised to nurture together. The weight of these revelations was suffocating, pressing down on every interaction, every shared moment that had once been filled with uncomplicated happiness. Navigating this new, treacherous terrain of doubt and fear was exhausting. I longed for the days when love was simple, when my biggest worry was what to cook for dinner, not whether my husband was sharing a meal with someone else. The innocence of our early years seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the growing shadows of secrecy and lies. The cold seeds of doubt planted by unanswered questions and subtle signs soon grew into a chilling reality. My fears, which I had tried to dismiss as mere insecurities, demanded my attention one ordinary yet fateful evening. It was a day like any other, with Clark returning home late, his face weary, his smile forced. The atmosphere had become a customary discomfort in what was once a sanctuary of love and family joy. As the evening wore on, Clark excused himself to take a shower, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. The buzzing of his phone broke the silence repeatedly, slicing through the stillness of our home with ominous persistence. Driven by a mix of desperation and dread, I approached the device that had become a barrier in our marriage. What I saw shattered the remnants of any denial I had clung to. The screen lit up with a message that read, "Miss you already? When can I see you again?" From the same unsaved number. The casual intimacy of the message was a gut punch, its words etching a painful scar across my heart. It was the confirmation I had feared, but also the catalyst for the confrontation I could no longer avoid. I waited for Clark in the living room, the phone placed precisely where he had left it, the message still glowing on the screen. When he returned, the look on his face as he noticed the displayed message was one of panic, quickly masked by an attempt at composure. My heart raced as I broke the silence, my voice steadier than I felt. "Clark, we need to talk. Now." The conversation that ensued was a chaotic blend of confession and evasion. Clark admitted to an affair, but wrapped his betrayal in excuses and justifications. He spoke of feeling lost, of a connection that had supposedly meant nothing, yet his words were hollow, his excuses as flimsy as the paper on which our marriage vows were once joyously written. As he spoke, I felt a profound sense of mourning, not just for our marriage, but for the man I thought I knew. The realization that the foundation of trust and love we had built our life upon was corrupted by deceit was devastating. I questioned everything, every late night, every unexplained absence, every moment that now seemed tainted by the shadow of his infidelity. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming, the pain of betrayal mixed with a strange sense of liberation from the lies that had bound us in a painful stasis. I knew that this revelation was not just an end but a beginning, the start of a painful, yet necessary journey towards healing and reclaiming my life. The days that followed were a blur of emotion and decision-making. I navigated the complexities of heartbreak, the logistical nightmares of separation, and the challenge of shielding our son from the pain that threatened to engulf us. My role as a mother gave me the strength to face each day, to fight for a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. Through it all, the shock of Clark's betrayal transformed into a resolve to rebuild my life, not around the fragments of what was lost, but with a new vision of what could be. It was a resolve forged in the fire of betrayal, but shaped by the desire for a future defined by authenticity and hope. The days following the confrontation were a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. I found myself oscillating between anger, despair, and a desperate longing for the past, for the life we had when everything seemed perfect. Despite the deep wounds Clark had inflicted, there was a part of me that couldn't completely let go of the man I had loved for so many years, the father of my child. It was in one of our many painful discussions that followed the revelation of his infidelity that Clark broke down, his facade of indifference crumbling under the weight of his own actions. He pleaded for forgiveness, tears streaking down his face, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Amelia. I never meant for any of this to happen. It was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake," he sobbed. His remorse appeared genuine, and in that moment, he seemed more like the man I had fallen in love with than the stranger he had become. He spoke of the pressures at work, of feeling overwhelmed by the responsibilities at home, and of the loneliness that had driven him into the arms of another. As I listened, a part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to erase the pain and reclaim the life we had. But the scars were deep, the betrayal real, and the trust that had once been the cornerstone of our marriage was now in ruins. Still, amidst the turmoil of my emotions, I saw a glimmer of hope. Not for our marriage as it was, but perhaps for something new, something built not on the naivety of the past, but on the hard lessons of the present. I decided to give Clark a chance, not for his sake, but for ours, for our family. If there was any way to salvage the love that had once been the core of our lives, then I felt compelled to try, if only to say we had faced this challenge with all the strength and grace we could muster. "We can try to work through this, Clark, but things need to change. We need to start over, rebuild from the ground up," I told him, my voice steady but my heart trembling with uncertainty. The road to forgiveness was arduous. It involved many sessions with a couples therapist, where we delved into the deeper issues that had plagued our relationship. We explored the unspoken grievances, the neglected needs, and the walls we had built over the years. It was during these sessions that I realized how much of ourselves we had lost in the routine of daily life, how far we had drifted apart without even noticing. Slowly, through open communication and a renewed commitment to each other, we began to mend the rift. Clark ended the affair and dedicated himself to being the partner and father he once was. His efforts, consistent and heartfelt, gradually helped to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. We learned to cherish the simple moments again, to find joy in the mundane aspects of our life together. As I watched Clark play with Lucas in the backyard, laughter filling the air that had once been heavy with silence and sorrow, I felt a cautious optimism. Perhaps this was what real love was about. Not the fairy tale perfection we had envisioned in our youth, but a deeper, more resilient bond, forged through the fires of real-life challenges and the work of genuine repentance and forgiveness. Our journey of healing was far from linear. There were setbacks, moments when the pain seemed too great, the betrayal too deep, but each time, we faced them together, learning from each mistake, each misstep, and moving forward, stronger and more connected than before. As I reflect on this chapter of our lives, I realize that forgiveness is not just a moment of emotional absolution, but a daily act of faith in the person you love and in the life you've chosen together. It is a testament to the belief that people can change, that love can evolve, and that hope can emerge from the depths of despair. That day had started with a lightness in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long while. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and as I drove down the familiar streets, I felt a tentative peace settling over me, a peace born from the fragile reconciliation Clark and I were nurturing. It was in this hopeful state that my world shattered in an instant. I remember the sharp blare of a horn and a fleeting, disbelieving thought that the oncoming car wasn't going to stop. Then, impact, sudden and brutal, like the world itself had split. The screeching of bent metal and the shattering of glass were the last coherent sounds I heard before pain clouded my senses. Despite the chaos, I remained conscious long enough to feel the car spinning, to sense the terrifying loss of control as my vehicle was flung across the road like a discarded toy. I tried to brace myself, to prepare for what I knew was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for the impact against the lamppost that finally halted my devastating dance across the asphalt. As the car came to a stop, the pain was immediate and overwhelming. I could hear the distant sounds of sirens and voices, people shouting, running towards the wreckage. My mind was foggy, but I clung to consciousness, driven by thoughts of Lucas and Clark. They need to know. I remember thinking desperately, Clark needs to know. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, their voices a mix of urgency and calm as they assessed the situation and worked to extricate me from the crumpled vehicle. I was dimly aware of being lifted, of the jolting pain as they moved me onto a stretcher. Through it all, I fought to stay awake, to tell them to call Clark, to make sure my son was safe. But as the ambulance doors closed and we sped towards the hospital, the pain and the drugs they administered to ease it pulled me under, and I slipped into darkness. It wasn't a gentle drifting. It was like falling off a cliff into a deep, consuming void. In the silent expanse of my coma, time ceased to have meaning. There, in the quiet recesses of unconsciousness, I remained oblivious to the world shifting ominously around me. Meanwhile, in the world beyond my hospital room, decisions were being made, decisions that would later greet me like a cold wind upon awakening. During those long weeks of my coma, Clark faced the grim prognosis doctors shared with little optimism. They spoke in hushed, clinical tones about the likelihood of recovery and the potential for lasting damage if I ever did wake up. As the days stretched into weeks, hope began to wane. The vibrant woman he had married seemed more a memory than a reality he could hold on to. Struggling under the weight of this uncertainty and the responsibilities of single parenthood, Clark reached a breaking point. He needed support, a reprieve from the relentless cycle of hospital visits, work, and caring for Lucas alone. Emotionally drained and physically exhausted, he made the decision to move himself and Lucas to his mother's house. It was a practical choice, providing them with the familial support they desperately needed, a semblance of normalcy in the turmoil that had become their lives. His mother, with her steady presence and nurturing touch, filled the gaps that my coma had created. She took over the daily routines, comforting Lucas, who was too young to fully understand why Mommy wouldn't wake up. Together they created a new routine, one that didn't include me, not out of malice, but necessity. Clark's visits to the hospital became less frequent, his updates brief as he began to shield himself from the pain of seeing me lie there, unresponsive. In his heart, Clark started to mourn. The vibrant conversations, the shared dreams, the simple pleasure of seeing me across the dinner table. These were memories that started to fade, replaced by the harsh reality of my hospital bed and the unresponsive beep of the monitor. With each passing day, he grappled with guilt and sorrow, the dual pain of losing his partner and the mother of his child, albeit not to death, but to a limbo that felt just as absolute. He moved on in the traditional sense of seeking someone else, but he also had moved forward because standing still amidst the uncertainty was more than he could bear. His life, once intertwined with mine, began to unravel, thread by thread, as he prepared himself and Lucas for a future that might not include me. Unaware of these developments, I remained in my coma, locked in a stillness that belied the storm of changes happening outside my hospital room. When I would eventually awaken, the reality of this emotional and physical distance would hit me with a force that was both bewildering and devastating. The life I had known, the family I had cherished, had adjusted to a world without me, and coming to terms with that would be one of the biggest challenges I had yet to face. When I finally emerged from the coma, the blurry figures and muffled sounds slowly sharpened into the stark reality of my hospital room. The first clear sight that greeted my returning consciousness was not of Clark's familiar, worried face, but rather of him standing awkwardly at the foot of my bed, a woman I didn't recognize clutching his arm with a timid, apologetic smile. Beside them, on the small hospital table, lay a stack of papers that screamed betrayal in the cold, legal terms of divorce. The shock was visceral, a gut punch that transcended the lingering pain of my physical injuries. The confusion of my waking mind struggled to piece together the scene before me, each detail a shard of glass piercing the heart I thought knew love and loyalty. Clark's voice broke through the fog of my disbelief, his words faltering as he introduced the woman beside him, someone he had met during the darkest days of my coma. He explained, with a voice laced with guilt, that he had not expected me to wake up, that he had moved on thinking he was navigating the grief of impending widowhood. The papers were his cowardly way of closing what he had prematurely considered a closed chapter. His justifications hung heavily in the air, suffocating in their inadequacy. As the reality of his actions settled in, a fierce resolve crystallized within me, fueled not just by the betrayal, but also by the primal urge to protect the well-being and future of our son. Lucas, who had been the light of our lives, now stood as the unwitting victim in the wreckage of our fractured marriage. The thought of him learning about this betrayal, about seeing his family dissolve in such a manner, ignited a fire within me. I would not let this situation define his understanding of love and family. I would not let Clark's actions dictate the course of our lives without a fight. As Clark and his companion left the room under the weight of my silent condemnation, the resolve hardened into action. I reached out to a lawyer, a friend from years ago who I trusted implicitly, to begin the battle for my rights and for custody of Lucas. The legal pathways were explained to me, each option weighed with the precision of a strategist planning. For battle, recovery took on a new meaning. It became about more than healing from the accident. It was about reclaiming my life, about rebuilding what had been unceremoniously shattered. My days were filled with physical therapy sessions to regain my strength and legal consultations to prepare for the impending custody and divorce proceedings. Each step forward in my recovery mirrored a step forward in my legal preparations. Throughout it all, my focus remained laser-sharp on Lucas. I arranged for regular video calls to keep our connection alive, each interaction a balm to the sting of separation and betrayal. In those moments, seeing his smile, hearing his laughter, I knew that no matter the outcome, my fight was righteous, born out of the unyielding love of a mother. My resolve to fight was not just about retribution, it was about setting an example for my son, that even in the face of deep betrayal and hardship, one can stand firm, fight justly, and emerge with integrity intact. This ordeal would not just be a chapter of victimhood in the book of my life, but a turning point where I rose, fought back, and shaped the narrative on my own terms. With my physical strength slowly returning and my resolve steeled, I turned my attention to the impending legal battle. It wasn't just about securing my rights anymore. It was about ensuring that Lucas's future would not be marred by the chaos of his parents' failing marriage. I was determined to provide a stable, loving environment for him, no matter the personal cost. As I prepared for the courtroom confrontations, I delved into every detail of the divorce and custody papers Clark had left at my bedside. The terms he proposed were far from fair, skewed heavily in his favor, clearly leveraging my medical condition as a point of weakness. but I was not the fragile woman he presumed me to be any longer. Each session with my lawyer was a lesson in legal strategy and personal empowerment. We decided to challenge every aspect of Clark's terms, especially the custody arrangements. My lawyer gathered a comprehensive dossier of evidence, documenting not just Clark's recent betrayal, but also his past patterns of behavior that we could argue affected his parenting. This included his emotional unavailability and the decisions he made during my coma, which we argued showed a lack of foresight and emotional stability required for sole custody. The day of the first hearing arrived, and as I entered the courtroom, leaning slightly on a cane but standing tall, I felt every eye on me. Clark's gaze was a mix of surprise and something else, perhaps remorse or fear, as he saw the determination in my eyes. His lawyer's opening remarks painted a picture of a man forced by circumstance into decisions he regretted but portraying him as the more capable parent. My lawyer's counter was swift and incisive. She laid out a timeline of events, highlighting not just the emotional abandonment, but also the rapid decisions Clark made that affected Lucas's well-being. She questioned his integrity, pointing out the introduction of a new partner to Lucas so soon and under such circumstances, which could cause significant psychological impact on a young child. As the legal arguments flew back and forth, I kept my focus clear, recalling every moment I spent in the hospital dreaming of a reunion with my son. This was no longer just about me and Clark. This was about ensuring that Lucas grew up knowing that his mother fought for him, that she did everything in her power to protect his emotional and psychological well-being. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, listened intently to both sides. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as she pondered the points presented. When she finally spoke, her words were measured but pointed, questioning Clark on his decisions, his current relationship status, and his plans for Lucas's upbringing. As the session concluded, no definitive decisions were made, but the judge ordered a temporary shared custody arrangement, pending a full review of Lucas's living conditions and psychological state by a child welfare expert. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless, giving me a foothold in the battle for my son's future. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt the weight of the day settle around me. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, but also invigorating. I had stood up for myself and for Lucas, and no matter the outcome of the future hearings, I had made it clear that I was a force to be reckoned with. The battle was far from over, but I was ready, armed with love, law, and a newfound strength that no one could take away. The weeks leading up to the final custody hearing were fraught with tension and preparation. Each day, I grew stronger, fueled, not just by my physical rehabilitation, but also by the emotional resolve to secure my son's future. The thought of Lucas being caught in the crossfire of a broken marriage was unbearable, and I poured all my energy into building a case that highlighted not just my capabilities as a mother, but also the stable, nurturing environment I could provide for him. As the day of the hearing approached, the weight of what was at stake settled heavily on my shoulders. The possibility of losing Lucas, even partially after everything we had been through, was a specter that haunted my restless nights. My lawyer, ever a pillar of support, prepared me for the range of possible outcomes, but her confidence in our case brought some comfort. The courtroom on that decisive day was a crucible of our shared past, with every moment leading to this point. As I took my seat, my hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the magnitude of the moment. Across the room, Clark sat, looking more subdued than I had ever seen him. It was clear the gravity of the situation was not lost on him either. When proceedings began, the air was thick with anticipation. My lawyer was the first to speak, methodically detailing the efforts I had made to rehabilitate physically and mentally, the strong bond between Lucas and me, and the positive assessments from the child welfare experts who had observed our interactions and home life. She painted a vivid picture of a mother's dedication and resilience, a narrative punctuated by evidence of my active involvement in Lucas's schooling and psychological care. Clark's lawyer attempted to counter, arguing for shared custody on the basis of Clark's recent attempts at stability and his emotional ties to Lucas. However, under cross-examination, his arguments faltered, especially when confronted with evidence of his hasty decisions and the instability those decisions had introduced into Lucas's life. As the judge listened intently, I could only hope that the depth of my love and commitment to Lucas shone through the legalese and procedural formalities. When it was my turn to speak, I chose to address the court directly. My voice steady but thick with emotion. I shared the journey of the past months, the challenges of waking from a coma, to a world where I had to fight for my son's very heart and home. I spoke of my hopes for Lucas's future, fears of the impact of further upheaval, and my unwavering commitment to his well-being. The room fell silent after my testimony, the emotional weight of my words hanging in the air. The judge took a long moment to review her notes before delivering her decision. The tension was palpable as she spoke, her voice clear and authoritative. She commended my dedication and resilience, acknowledging the clear bond between mother and son as critical to his ongoing development. Her verdict was decisive. Full custody was granted to me, with reasonable visitation rights for Clark, ensuring that Lucas's upbringing would be stable and rooted in the nurturing environment I provided. The gavel's final bang was like the closing of a heavy door and the opening of a new one. Relief washed over me in an overwhelming wave. I had fought against all odds and emerged victorious, not out of vengeance, but out of an unyielding desire to protect my son from any more harm. As I left the courtroom, the weight of months of uncertainty lifted from my shoulders. I was free to focus on building a future for Lucas and me, a future filled with hope and devoid of the shadows of the past. The battle had been grueling, but justice had prevailed, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. Lucas's joyful embrace when I returned home that day was the sweetest affirmation of the judge's decision. We could finally move forward, our bond unbroken and stronger than ever, secure in the knowledge that the law had stood on the side of love and maternal devotion. As I began to rebuild my life with Lucas, a semblance of normalcy and peace gradually returned to our daily routines. Yet, unknown to me, a storm was brewing on the horizon, one that would bring final closure to the tumultuous chapters of our past. It started with a call from my lawyer, her tone serious and urgent, asking me to come to her office as soon as possible. Upon my arrival, she revealed shocking news. Clark had been under investigation. My initial reaction was disbelief. Clark, despite his faults, had never seemed capable of crossing into outright illegality. However, as she laid out the details, the picture became painfully clear. During our custody battle, Clark, driven by desperation and fear of losing Lucas, had attempted to bribe a judge to sway the decision in his favor. The investigation had begun quietly, tipped off by an anonymous source who had noticed irregularities in Clark's financial statements and his frequent, secretive meetings with unknown individuals. As the authorities dug deeper, they unraveled a trail of evidence that pointed to an attempted corruption of the legal process. The judge, adhering strictly to ethical standards, had reported the attempt, triggering a full-scale investigation. The legal ramifications for Clark were severe. Attempting to bribe a judge was not only a moral failing, but a criminal offense that carried significant consequences. He faced charges that could lead to prison time and the complete ruin of his professional reputation. The news of his downfall spread quickly, leaving our community and his family in shock. For me, the revelation was a mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication because the justice system had worked, protecting not just us, but the integrity of the legal process. Yet, there was an undeniable sadness in seeing the father of my child, a man I had once loved and trusted, fall so far. It was a tragic end to his series of poor decisions, each one compounding his mistakes until they had led him to this final, disastrous action. As I processed the news, my thoughts turned to Lucas. Protecting him from the fallout was my utmost priority. I sat him down and explained, in terms as gentle as possible, that his father had made some serious mistakes, and that it might be a while before he could see him again. Lucas's confusion and sadness were heart-wrenching, but I reassured him of my love and the presence of our extended family, who would help fill the void his father's absence might leave. The legal proceedings against Clark were swift, given the overwhelming evidence. He pleaded guilty, hoping for a reduced sentence, but the damage was done. His actions not only ensured his legal punishment, but also permanently damaged his relationship with Lucas, who, despite his young age, struggled to understand how his father could have made such choices. Clark's downfall served as a somber reminder of how desperation and fear could drive one to the brink of moral decay. It was a painful conclusion to our shared history, but it also marked the end of our long-standing legal and emotional struggles. With Clark facing his consequences, Lucas and I could finally look forward to a future free from the turmoil that had shadowed our lives. This period marked not just the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new era, one where Lucas and I could heal, grow, and rebuild our lives on foundations of trust, integrity, and love. As I watched Lucas play freely, his laughter ringing clear and true, I knew that despite everything, we had found our way through the storm. We were ready to move forward, stronger and more united than ever. The downfall of Clark was both swift and catastrophic. As the legal proceedings unfolded and his guilt in attempting to manipulate the justice system was established, the consequences began to ripple out, impacting every aspect of his life. It wasn't just a legal battle he lost, it was everything that once defined him. After the sentencing, Clark's professional life unraveled at an alarming pace. His reputation in the business community, built over many years, crumbled under the weight of his criminal actions. Partners withdrew their collaborations, clients distanced themselves, and his career, once a source of great pride and accomplishment, was left in shambles. The industry that once respected him now shunned him, leaving him a pariah in his own field. Financial ruin followed as legal fees accumulated and sources of income dried up. The lavish lifestyle he had maintained became unsustainable, forcing him to sell assets at a loss just to keep afloat. The beautiful home we once shared, filled with memories of better times, was put on the market, a stark symbol of how far he had fallen. But the most profound loss was personal. Lucas, the center of our world, was deeply affected by his father's actions. The revelation of Clark's attempt to bribe a judge not only shattered any remaining trust between them, but also marked a turning point in their relationship. Despite my efforts to facilitate some form of communication, the emotional distance between father and son widened. Lucas struggled with feelings of betrayal and confusion, his understanding of right and wrong challenged by his father's actions. As Clark's world collapsed around him, our interactions became increasingly strained and infrequent. Each court-mandated visitation was a painful reminder of the consequences of his choices. Lucas, often silent after these visits, would cling to me, seeking reassurance in a world that no longer made sense to him. It broke my heart to see him so unsettled, and I found myself grappling with anger and pity for Clark, whose decisions had led us here. In the quiet moments after Lucas had gone to bed, I would sometimes reflect on the man Clark had once been. The vibrant, loving husband who had stood by my side seemed like a ghost from another life. It was difficult to reconcile that image with the man who had so thoroughly destroyed his own life through a series of disastrous choices. Clark's final blow came not just in the form of legal and financial ruin, but in the complete loss of his family. As he faced his days alone, the full impact of his actions became inescapable. The divorce was not just a separation of two lives, but the dismantling of what could have been a beautiful future together. He had lost not just a wife and a son, but a part of himself too. The tragedy of Clark's downfall served as a harsh lesson in accountability and the devastating impact of deceit. For Lucas and me, it marked the end of a tumultuous chapter and the beginning of a new journey, one built on the lessons learned from the hardships we had endured. Our bond, strengthened by adversity, became our greatest asset as we moved forward, determined to find happiness and stability in the wake of the storm. Clark's story ended not with a bang, but a whimper, a slow, painful realization of all he had lost. For those of us left in the aftermath, it was a reminder of the values we held dear and the future we still hoped to build, a future where integrity and love would guide our way. A year had passed since the courtroom declared me the sole custodian of Lucas, a year that seemed both impossibly long and startlingly brief. As I sat on our back porch watching Lucas play with his dog in the golden afternoon light, a sense of profound peace settled over me. This was the life I had fought so hard to secure, a life of tranquility and joy, far removed from the tumult of the past. Over the year, our home had transformed into a sanctuary of healing and happiness. We had painted the walls in soft, soothing colors, hung new art that featured landscapes and abstracts that brought us peace, and filled shelves with books that promised adventure and discovery. Every corner of our home was curated to foster a sense of security and warmth, a stark contrast to the cold uncertainty that had once shadowed our days. Lucas had grown visibly, not just in stature but in spirit. The anxiety that once clouded his expressions had given way to a boyish confidence, a direct result of the stable, loving environment we now enjoyed. He was doing well in school, making friends, and exploring new interests, including a newfound passion for music and art, which we nurtured with lessons and encouragement. Our days were structured around simple pleasures and routines. Mornings were for breakfast together, often with pancakes or his favorite cereal, followed by school for him and work for me. I had taken a role at a local community center, leading initiatives that supported single parents and children in difficult transitions. The work was fulfilling, and it allowed me to give back to the community that had supported us through our darkest times. Evenings were our special time. Whether it was cooking dinner together or reading stories before bed, each moment was cherished. Weekends were reserved for little adventures, local trips, nature hikes, or visits to museums. These were the times when we could talk, laugh, and forget about the world beyond our little bubble. The emotional journey hadn't been without its challenges, of course. There were days when the shadows of the past loomed a bit too large, days when the hurt and betrayal echoed a little too loudly in my mind. But these moments were becoming rarer, softened by the love and laughter that filled our home. The legal battles and Clark's subsequent downfall seemed like a distant memory now. Though he was part of Lucas's life to a minimal extent, governed by strict visitation rules, our interactions were cordial if sparse. Clark had moved away, seeking a fresh start in a different city, which had allowed us both the space to heal and focus on the future. I had found new strength in community and friendship. My friends, old and new, were a constant source of support and joy. They were there for the celebrations and the setbacks, making both easier to bear. Their presence reminded me that no journey, no matter how daunting, needed to be walked alone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our yard, I reflected on the year that had passed. It had been a year of rebuilding and rebirth, of turning pain into purpose and fear into hope. Watching Lucas chase his dog across the yard, his laughter ringing clear in the crisp evening air, I knew that every difficult decision, every tear, and every moment of doubt had been worth it. We had not just survived. We had thrived. And as I called him inside for dinner, the smell of something delicious wafting from the kitchen, I felt a surge of gratitude for this new beginning, for the chance to write new chapters on our own terms, filled with the simple, extraordinary joy of being together.